I uncovered the haunted secrets of 5 Japanese serial killers, and what they left behind. I never should have opened that door. The air felt thick, heavy with secrets better left buried. I went through my typical day, sipping coffee, scrolling through my phone, blissfully ignorant. But in the hush of night, curiosity turned to dread. I stumbled upon whispers of darkness horrors that festered in the shadows of Japan's history. Serial killers, lurking monsters, waiting for their stories to be told. Take, for instance, the infamous Tsutomu Miyazaki, the otaku murderer. His bubbling obsession with anime twisted into blades. He sought young girls under the guise of innocence, only to leave behind tales soaked in blood and terror. I could almost feel the chill of his presence creeping up my spine as I read, like fingers grazing my neck, whispering warnings. Then there was the horrifying detail surrounding Fumiko Inomoto, a woman scorned. Having lost her grip on reality, she wielded a knife like an artist with a brush, painting a canvas of chaos, shaping lives into tragedy. Her laughter before the kill echoed in my mind, a haunting melody in the dead of night. It's in these moments that the shadows grew deeper, closing in on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. As I scoured the chilling accounts, the setting morphed. My dimly lit room felt colder. The shadows danced as if mocking me, a thick sense of foreboding swelling within me. Outside, wind howled like the cries of the fallen. I could swear I heard whispers luring me, taunting me. Objects seemed to shift with the change in the atmosphere, and I felt my heart pound against my ribs. Then, I read about a lesser-known figure, a ghost in the annals of crime, his name lost to time. Yet his deeds lingered like a scar on humanity's soul. Head vanished without a trace, leaving only a shroud of mystery, a gaping hole in the tales of terror. What did he take with him? What dark knowledge still rests with his memory? My breathing quickened as the tension rose. I was drawn into the rabbit hole, each fact more unsettling than the last. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Each creak of the floorboards beneath me felt like a cautionary tale. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the silence, slicing the tension in two. I froze. What was it? I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. My eyes darted to the door, heart clanging against my chest like a warning bell. There it was again, followed by an eerie quiet. A shadow flickered in the corner of my eye, and I knew the darkness held something sinister, something alive. Should I open the door? My instincts screamed at me to run, but curiosity clawed at my mind, itching to uncover the truth. I stepped closer, hand trembling, nails digging into my palm. Hey! Before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon, and while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The knocking grew more insistent, a rhythmic thud that reverberated through the walls of my apartment. Each sound gripped me tighter in a web of fear, pulling me deeper into its unsettling embrace. I could almost feel the pulse of something inhuman lurking just beyond the threshold. What manner of demon had I provoked by digging deeper into those bloody tales? I took a deep breath to steady myself, but that just made the taste of dread sharperdo inspire courage. Now felt like calling forth a curse that I inched toward the door, the chill in the air thickening with each step. I couldn't shake the sensation that whatever waited on the other side knew my fears, understood my curiosity. As I placed my hand on the cold doorknob, I felt a surge of revulsion coursing through me. Would it be a face twisted with rage? A specter from history? My mind screamed at me to retreat, to abandon this reckless pursuit of knowledge, but it was too late for that. I had crossed a threshold of my own. With a reluctant twist, I opened the door, a creak echoing into the hollow night. On the other side, nothing. Just the endless void of darkness spilling into my room like a viscous black sludge. Yet, I could feel something shifting in the space just beyond the doorframe, and I knew I wasn't truly alone as I hesitated on the precipice of this new void. A faint sound rippled through the silence. A whisper, fragile yet heavy with weight, curled around my ear. "Help me!" It was a child's voice, a lament that rolled across my skin like the brush of icy fingers. Instinctively, I recoiled, slamming the door shut with a force that rattled me to my core. But the echo of that lost plea reverberated. Now it felt like scratching at the insides of my skull. Denial washed over me, but it was swiftly followed by an overwhelming compulsion to return. My heart beat faster, each pulse an insistence. I had to know what had beckoned to me. Through the cracks of the door, I squinted into the void, trying to push away the haze that enveloped my sanity. There was something flickering just beyond, an existence just out of reach. Then, without warning, the temperature plummeted, and I saw a fleeting shadow seem to dart across the hallway. A shape with an unnatural agility that hinted at a presence more malevolent than I had originally sensed. The whisper returned, now sharpened with urgency. "Through the door, please." With panic clawing at my throat, I forced myself to step back outside. The hall was a desolate cavern, walls draped with peeling paint and faded photographs of people I didn't recognize. Each image bore not only faces but hollow eyes, staring like marionettes cut from their strings. I felt their gazes follow me as I shuffled forward, pulling my jacket tighter around myself, the fabric suddenly feeling flimsy against the chill of the unknown. That voice, was it real? Or was it a phantom, a remnant of those long past? I took another step, and the sound of a child's laughter echoed down the corridor, albeit warped as if it had traveled through the depths of time, tainted by grief. "Come play with us. Come find us," they begged, an invitation that sank deeper than any weight the lore of serial killers had placed upon my soul. I began to walk hesitantly, as if pulled by a thin tether, the pull almost magnetic. My senses heightened, every creeping sound distorted in the heavy silence. Every step a risky venture into a pit where truths twisted and morphed into unrecognizable horrors. In that moment of uncertainty, a door to my right swung open violently, its edges whispering despair. I flinched, and from it rushed an overwhelming clamoring of voices, a torrent of unfinished tales that clawed at the corners of my mind. Each syllable seemed to overlap with the next, creating a cacophony of lost anguish, their cries echoing. They were imprisoned souls crying for release. Before I could recoil, a figure stumbled out from the shadows. It was a young girl, drenched in shadows, her face obscured. Her matted hair hung like a curtain, revealing only the slightest hint of wide, terrified eyes. "You have to help me," she gasped in a voice that sent a jolt of recognition through me, igniting a flicker of guilt buried deep within my memory. But behind her, something shifted, a dark presence slowly emerging from the darkened doorway. A figure loomed, twisted in its form, with eyes that glinted with malice. Time suspended in that moment, horror crashing down like a tidal wave, swallowing me whole. Before I could turn to flee, the girl reached out for me, her hand grasping at the air, fingers trembling. "They can't take me back. Please." The wretched sound of her plea blended seamlessly with the haunting laughter of the shadows gathered behind her. I stood paralyzed, caught in a web where reality and nightmare intertwined. The air turned colder, the shroud of sadness tightening around us, suffocating any chance of escape. And then it struck me: true horror was not just what lay behind in shadow, but the realization that I had crossed a line, opening doors I could never close. The shadows surged forward, hungry for new story as me story. The last thing I saw was the flicker of those malefic eyes as they closed in, and the darkness swallowed not just the light, but my very soul. The darkness closed around me, a thick, suffocating blanket that extinguished any hope of light or clarity. I felt the girl's fingers smack against my wrist, her grasp desperate, pulling me into the abyss. Her eyes burned with a terror that seared my soul, but what I sensed behind her could only be described as sheer malice, an intention that far outweighed any attachment to mortal fear. "Please," she whimpered, "they're coming." But before I could muster the courage to move, the specter behind her twisted and contorted, almost liquid-like in its approach. It flowed closer, its features obscured, Yet an undeniable power radiated from its being, and my instincts screamed in chorus to flee. Panic surged through my veins, a primal instinct battling against a sense of morbid curiosity that had drawn me here in the first place. "I can't go back," the girl cried out. The shadows writhed at her words, echoing her despair with a symphony of sinister laughter that felt teetering on the edge of insanity. And I looked around, desperate for a means of escape, my eyes darting to the doorframe from which she had emerged a crooked threshold back into my apartment, back to the realm where reality still held sway. But the figure loomed closer, and with each inch it encroached, I felt pieces of my resolve wilting, like autumn leaves caught in an inescapable gale. "Trust me," the girl pleaded, eyes wide, pupils dilating into infinity. "You have to believe me. They are trapped here because of you." Her words landed with an eerie finality, jolting me back to the frigid bite of the corridor's air. I had invoked more than just ancient tales. I had opened a conduit to their suffering, and somewhere in my relentless pursuit of ghosts had awakened something even more malignant. The dark figure twisted, revealing what appeared to be a mouth lined with 1,000 teeth, grotesquely grinning as if feasting off my horror. "Join us," it rasped, each syllable punctuated with the grim echoes of 1,000 souls. "Become part of our story. Help me," the girl cried again, pulling me closer but moving further from the door. She was now directly in the path of the thing stalking her, and with an unearthly shriek that seemed to strangle the air, it lunged. I gripped her wrist, torn between the instinct to save her and the urgency to save myself. The moment stretched into an agonizing eternity as I witnessed the fear etch itself into her features. "Don't look," she urged, but it was too late. My eyes were drawn to the thing's expectant hung-era swirling mass of despair wrapped in shadows, whispering promises of forgotten tragedies. With a sudden surge of determination, I yanked the girl back toward the door, slamming my shoulder into the threshold of my apartment. Something cold and clawed snagged the hem of my jacket, pulling me back for one dreadful moment before ripping free. I tumbled backward, landing hard on the floor of my dim-lit apartment. But the girl was not with me. I looked up in horror just as the door began to close, the chilling laughter of the shadows rushing back through it as if feasting upon the final shred of brightness I had fought so hard to preserve. My heart raced. Her scream echoed, fear resonating through the fabric of reality as she vanished, pulled back into the depths, swallowed by the darkness I had unwittingly set free. The door swung shut, and the knocking resonated through my entire being, louder than before. It was a heartbeat, a reminder that the darkness had not only claimed her but was coming for me too. That I stumbled to my feet, my chest tight with anguish. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, coiling back toward the front door, reforming like sinuous dancers of despair. Their whispers slithered through the cracks, urging me to succumb to hopelessness. "Join us," they beckoned, taunting me with the siren song of solace wrapped in tragedy. Pooling dread congealed in my stomach as I glanced to the window. Outside, the streets glimmered eerily, but no movement marked the ground below, only an impending void that deepened my sense of isolation. I should have never ventured into the illicit legends. The horror had seeped through the portal I had carelessly opened, but as I turned my attention back to the door, a cold chill traced my spine. The last remnants of brightness faded with the girl's plea. A slow, dreadful scratching sound echoed from the door, startlingly human, too familiar yet utterly foreign. "Oh, you couldn't," I whispered, and in that moment, realization washed over me, as suffocating as the shadows tightening around my throat. The knocking grew louder, demanding my understanding, the bloodstains of past stories soaking through the threshold. All those I had researched before now clawed their way back into my life, intertwining with a reality where I was unwittingly both witness and participant. Then the doorknob twisted, and a frail whisper floated into the room. "Let me in, help us." I found myself face to face with what waited on the other side, both unrecognizable and achingly familiar, as dread spiraled into a chasm of darkness that felt like home. And in that moment, I knew I was just as trapped as the girl who had vanished. The doorknob turned slowly, a cacophony of creaks filling the air as if the very wood held its breath. The faint whisper on the other side turned into a chorus, voices layered with despair, echoing off the walls and wrapping around my consciousness like a vice. Each syllable ignited a flame of cold dread deep within me, kindling memories of the unspeakable, stories of violence and despair that were never meant to resurface. Within the shadows of the hall, something shifted, skin crawling over bone, the wet sound of unhinged mouths parting in prayerful tongues. It was as if the darkest corners of my research had become flesh and blood, reanimating the horrors I had only glimpsed through the lenses of books and documentaries. My fingers tingled with the need to retreat, yet my feet remained glued to the ground, bound by an invisible thread of morbid fascination. "Let me in, help us," the voice rose again, each word drenched in anguish. It sounded like the girl, echoed through a myriad of souls who had met cruel ends, each plea a haunting reflection of what awaited on the other side. Tears threatened to spill from my eyes as the realization erupted within me: if I opened that door, I wouldn't just be letting them in. I would be letting their stories spill into my own life, irrevocably intertwining our fates. But the darkness was relentless. As the knob twisted further, the door cracked open just enough for a sliver of inky black to seep through. I recoiled at the sight, faces pressed against the doorframe, distorted and elongated, reflecting the torment of death's embrace. There was a woman with hollow eyes, a boy with a gaping wound where his mouth should be, and others who existed only in a realm of horror I had grazed in my research. Their expressions bore the weight of secrets and blood-stained memories, a tapestry woven from the threads of lives cut short. "Please," the woman pleaded, her voice trembling as she reached toward me, her fingers skeletal. "We need to be free. You've shown us a way, but we cannot escape alone." That I shook my head, desperation clawing at my throat. "If I let you in, I will be trapped too." "Trapped?" The voices laughed, a sound reminiscent of 1,000 crumbling stones. "You're already here." They bent the door wider, the creak resonating like the deepest notes of a funeral dirge, and in that moment, a gust of wind blustered from the doorway, whirling through the apartment as if an unseen force were waiting to rush in and consume me whole. Wine twisted around my legs, pulling me toward the door, but I fought against it, planting my feet firmly on the ground. The scratching intensified, nails clawing at wood mixed with whispers that spiraled into shrieks of joy and terror. "Help us!" they cried, a chaos of sorrow and mania. As I pressed my back against the wall, a deep pang of recognition surged through me. Somewhere behind their twisted forms was the girl lost among them, forever bound to the torment of her own story. "What do you want from me?" I rasped, my breath echoing the flicker of despair that tethered me to the threshold. The air thickened with anticipation as I realized their stories were not merely tales of horror but offerings, shards of a fractured truth demanding to be spoken aloud, craving acknowledgement. They wouldn't let me go until I knew what they knew. "Become us," came the unified promise from the abyss, a chorus finding harmony in the grotesque. "Become one with our suffering. Tell the world our stories." Something shattered in my chest. The very essence of my being teetered on the edge. Flickers of warmth threatened to extinguish beneath the weight of their grief. The thought consumed Muhat of my life would remain if I succumbed to their plea. What horror would I unleash into the world? I shook my head violently, tearing away the visions. The pictures of death, blood, and violation danced behind my eyes, making me question my own sanity. But my resistance only stoked their fury. The very air turned electric, charged with a malice that wrapped around my throat like spectral fingers. "Tell us, or you'll never be alone. You'll always see us." They shrieked in unison, melding into an awful cacophony too horrific to describe. With a desperate cry, I lunged for the door, ready to slam it shut when a writhing mass poured through, screaming, a tide of anguish surging past the threshold of reality. Faces swarmed toward me, pressing in closer, their eyes wide and mouths agape, gaping wounds of history begging for closure. Stripped of the pretense of life, they danced around me in ghostly agony, amber tendrils wrapping around my limbs, securing me in place. I shouted, the sound crashing against the weight of their collective sorrow. But it was no use. The darkness enveloped, swallowing my voice, stealing my breath, robbing me of anything that once tethered me to this world. A blinding flash of terror surged through me as the doorknob fell off completely, collapsing outward and revealing a deeper darkness than my mind could comprehend. With a final, resounding chorus, the shadows rushed in, and I felt the weight of those waiting souls crashing down upon me. An avalanche of grief and violence, and just as they closed in, I glimpsed one last familiar face, the girl, her wide eyes filled with an unsettling mix of relief and despair. Finally, I understood the stories I had dared uncover had not just awakened their despair. They had entwined us all in a fate worse than death itself. "Help us," she cried, her voice barely a whisper above the chaos. And as the abyss swallowed me whole, a single horrific thought pierced through the gathering gloom. What if my own story was just beginning? The weight of their anguish pressed down on me like shadows turned to stone, suffocating my cries for help and drowning me in a torrent of sorrow. Reflexively, I twisted my body, clawing at the specters dragging me into the maw of darkness. But my pleas only fueled their frenzy. The laughter that rose from them was a wild cacophony, sharpening into shrill, desperate wails that echoed in the very crevices of my mind. Time twisted, stretches of dread and disbelief morphing into an endless loop of despair. I gasped, drawing heat and life into my lungs in short, ragged bursts as I desperately sought a way to fight their grasp. But it was futile. The borders of reality blurred, and my consciousness began to reel a carousel of flickering memories and faces that flickered like flame, bright and then extinguished, leaving nothing but cold emptiness in their wake. "Tell the stories." The chorus roared, now a singular beast of agony swelling in pitch and ferocity. I felt their pain rushing through my veins. Yes, I wanted to scream for them. But who would hear? Who would listen? With every new ghost that pressed closer, I became even more entangled in their web of sorrow. It was intoxicating and suffocating all at once. The girl's face haunted me, glimmers of familiarity piercing through the chaos like the last rays of sunset before nightfall. In their haunted eyes, I saw my own fears, my buried anguish, and the question I so desperately tried to drown. What had they all suffered? And then, as if the tension hit a breaking point, their salacious whispers swelled into howls and shrieks that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. The walls began to bleed a creeping dark that coiled and twisted like serpents, staining the floor with thick rivulets of inky despair. It dripped like black rain, pooling at my feet, and as I gazed down, something shifted beneath the surfacious sight that churned my stomach. Hands emerged, twisting up through the floor, fingers grasping, beckoning for release. They were once more the lost souls of tormented lives, reaching toward me in hopeless yearning. "We hold the key," they murmured, their voices flowing together like a dreadful melody. "But you must learn the truth of what it means to suffer." I fought back against the chaos, trying to deny their pull, but the stories of violence, betrayal, and heartache wove around me tighter. I could feel them snaking into my thoughts, intertwining until distinguishing my own memories from theirs became impossible. A labyrinth of horrors unfurled in my mind, one nightmare bleeding into another, each etched with names that I'd once scoured for knowledge. Then, amid the overwhelming chaos, one name cut through with chilling clarity. Yashatek, the butcher of lost children, the name we never dared utter, without shivers snaking down our spines at the content within those pages. I felt the weight of his legacy hanging heavy over me, as if I had been drawn into the heart of his own darkness, sinking into depths I was never meant to tread. His story demands a voice. The girl's whispered edge sliced through the thick tension, wrapping around me like silk strands of despair, essential yet suffocating. "You cannot escape. You must listen, or we will consume what you hold dear." Visions cascaded over me. A child shrieking in terror, running through blood-soaked alleyways, faceless as their innocence was obliterated in sickening snapshots that played like film clips behind my eyelids. I trembled, desperately trying to wrench myself from the damp grip of history. I had survived this long in the shelter of ignorance, hadn't I? But the memory of the girl, now somehow ethereal and timeless, drew me back, her pleas a glimmer of warmth in this relentless darkness. "Join us." The shadows hissed, their voices now rooting deeper into my skin, burrowing into every sinew. "The stories bind us. They save us." You will see. With a sudden surge, the tendrils of darkness yanked me down toward the abyss, dragging me towards shadows thick as molasses. Paralyzed by dread, My scream echoed in mute horror as the room expanded, revealing a grotesque chamber that pulsed with life, yet was dotted with remnants of death. But just as I thought I would be engulfed, a wall split open before me, a door, a way out cloaked in blinding light that beckoned me despite the magnetism of the horror all around. I leaped for the portal, heart pounding as I tried to shake off the grasping hands reaching for my ankles. As I neared the threshold, desperate hope flooded my veins, the chance of escape. The moment my fingertips grazed the doorframe, the scene erupted in chaos. Shadows recoiled violently, faces contorting in rage and sorrow, as if my mere action was the last act of defiance they could not allow. "No, you will not leave without completing the story," they screamed, and the room convulsed, walls twisting as if to obliterate the doorway itself. In that moment, I felt the warmth of the girl's spirit surge beside me. With a final, anguished glance over my shoulder and hearing the echoes of forgotten lives in my ears, I took a breath, ready to plunge into the lightly for one last voice to pierce the chaos. The stories cannot end here. With that, all at once, the door slammed shut as if it had never existed, and darkness collapsed in waves around me, leaving me to face those wretched souls who refused to be forgotten. "Tell them," the girl whispered, her voice smooth as silk and yet grating like dry paper. "Tell them what we've seen." And with that, I understood being trapped wasn't merely about the specters around me. It was the burden of their tales now stamped and intertwined with my own soul, coursing through me like blood. As the void circled in once more, I felt the invisible bond tighten, ensnaring me in a fate far more terrifying than I had ever foreseen. Realizing that my voice was not a means of escape but the key to an even darker door closing behind me. But what would awaken when it finally creaked open? As darkness seeped back into the crevices of my vision, reality flickered, and the shadows began to settle, reluctantly forming the contours of a grotesque version of my surroundings. I stood in a dimly lit room, the air charged with the suffocating weight of unfulfilled souls. Where had the doorway gone? The girl hovered beside me, a mere wisp of despair radiating with accusatory eyes, the last vestige of warmth feeling colder by the second. "You think you can escape, but you have already accepted our fate," she whispered, her voice like the fluttering of moths in a darkened room. "You are one of us now." I felt roots coil around my ankles. The very floor pulsed as if it were alive, hungry for life yet steeped in death. A desperate instinct screamed at me to flee, but how could I run from what had now seeped into my core? This tomb for the lost seemed to breathe, and I was its captive from the shadows. Figures began to materialize, their features grotesque and distorted, hauntingly familiar. They were faces I had seen in articles, glimpsed in the pages of dark lore that I thought I'd put to rest. Each blink of recognition clawed deeper into my psyche, drawing out an old dread I had long buried. "Do you remember them?" The shadows taunted, their hissing laughter reverberating, forming a soundscape that knifed through my spirit. "You thought you knew their stories well. Oh, sweet child, let us tell you what they left behind, a legacy drenched in blood and sealed with indifference." Suddenly, the walls transformed, twisting like grotesque figures contorting in agony as they replayed the agonizing tales of each sinister whisper. A child dragged under a bed, eyes wide with terror. A mother weeping over a grave, her sobs crystallizing the air like shards of ice. And that scene, the butcher's thickened hands staining with innocence, carving into the flesh of the unsuspecting. I recoiled, bile rising in my throat. The tales wove in my mind like a tapestry of torment, and I felt their pain pulsating in my veins. Yashatek, the name reverberated through the air around us, weighted with malice. The shadows coalesced, forming a towering figure whose silhouette flickered at the edges, a grotesque parody of humanity. "You crave answers, but you will find only the depths of despair. When you take on the mantle of storytelling." I shook my head, tears trailing my cheeks, but the darkness swelled, smothering my resistance. The girl's once gentle face warped, her eyes now luminous with longing and sorrow. "If you can't tell their story, then their pain will morph into yours. You don't want to remember what happens next." But I had no choice. Tendrils of darkness wrapped around my limbs, chill fingers caressing my neck, penetrating deep into my mind until they began to carve out my thoughts, forcing out whispered truths that clawed at the corners of my consciousness. Each breath drew me a little closer to a horrific clarity, one that merged my identity with theirs, drowning me in a tempest of agony. Tell us, they chanted, their voices a ghastly chorus that intensified, surrounding me in a symphony of despair. Do not run from our story. We rely on you. Only when you embrace the darkness can you guide us to peace. As the pressure mounted, I felt a sharpness slice through my being, not pain, but an awakening to something old and powerful. A memory, not my own, unfurled. Standing in the alley, I could see it all, the butcher's shop, the flickering light of a neon sign casting eerie shadows over the chipped pavement, a cacophony of screams echoing louder until they filled my ears. The weight of what Yashitake had done surged through me. I was seated at the heart of it, a passenger burdened by truth rather than fear. No, not like this, I screamed, but my voice fell flat, the darkness swallowing my pleas. Suddenly, the shadows convulsed violently, shaking off their spectral forms as a blinding light erupted in the center of the room, reshaping reality. A breach opened, a portal, pulsating with the energy of memories lost. My instincts screamed to pull away, but I was drawn towards it, each step weighed by unseen hands as the air around me roiled with anguish. The girl's voice, now frenzied and urgent, cut through the chaos around me. You must give them what they seek. You must tell their stories before the darkness consumes us all. With a final pull, as if the earth itself had parted to swallow me whole, I staggered toward the radiance. But the instant I reached for the light, it flickered like a dying flame, and only then did I catch sight of what lay in the depths, a sight darker than anything I had ever faced before. A story yet unspoken, an end yet untold. And then I heard it, an echoing laugh that sent shivers down my spine, chilling me to the bone as shadows twisted and sank back, revealing the last glimpse of its horror. Welcome to the tales that will bind you forever. What choice would I make? What path would I chase? And who would I become if I stepped into that new darkness? The light engulfed me, a blinding salvation juxtaposed against the suffocating gloom that clung to my body like a shroud. I felt the weight of countless Aisa congregation of souls that had slipped through the cracks of time. Uncountable, unnameable, they were eager and expectant, their voices a frail whisper woven into the cold, taunting air. It sent drumming hearts echoing through the silence, a staccato rhythm that pounded against my eardrums, drowning out any rational thought. Within the shimmering glow, I glimpsed fleeting images, twisted smiles, eyes burning fervently with grievances unconfessed. Wrenching my gaze away from them felt impossible. My feet began to shuffle, entranced by the magnetic pull of the radiant portal, a beacon shimmering with the promise of revelations. But reality was relentless, and the darkness they called me back into was shifty. The shadows, no longer content to linger, churned with renewed vigor, coiling around my legs as if trying to establish their ownership with fervent desperation. The girl stood rooted beside me, her form now flickering like a malfunctioning light bulb, each pulse warping her once innocent features into a more sinister visage. Once you cross over, you will be ours, she hissed, the words sharp as daggers, punctuated with that haunting laughter that reverberated through the very marrow of my bones. That I faltered, doubt clawing at the edges of my resolve. What kind of stories awaited me in the abyss? Would I be delivering the truth or simply breathing life into a never-ending cycle of anguish? I raised my hand, trembling, toward the light. Its warmth was enticing, contrasting the chill of the shadows snaking up my body, yet a part of me wrestled against accepting that caress. And then, without warning, the bright tendrils snatched back, withdrawing into the depths of that glowing void, leaving only a grim echo resonating in the stale era, lingering invitation now twisted into a sinister demand. The laughter grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of despair that felt both familiar and alien. Join us, become part of the narrative, the shadows chanted, their voices fused into an imploring yet savage unity. Rewrite the endings for those who never had won. The ground beneath quaked. Despair twisted into an unrelenting grip around my throat. Stories snapped, tangling with invisible threads deep within the pit of my core. The burden of their pain igniting a fire that carved through the peripheries of my consciousness. I staggered back as memories surged for the grotesque parade of horror I had never lived, yet felt entwined with that I saw the butcher again, blood dripping from his hands like an unreal waterfall cascading onto his apron. And beside him, the billowing form of another shadow, a woman with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, who had stood victorious over her own horror yet shattered by grief. They called out now in bitter unison, "Tell it to every trembling soul." Fragments fused together. I could hear the slashing of identical knives cutting through flesh, hear the muted cries as the innocence was obliterated, hear their voices rising against mountains of indifference. It became imperative, a nearly overwhelming compulsion. If I did not uphold their stories, I would merge with their anguish, body and soul. Each echoing cry trapped me tighter. It was potent, their sadness fed the darkness that flailed around me. I grappled for breath, grappling to escape the sickening tide that threatened to sweep me away. I raced toward the portal, desperate for clarity, searching for a single thread of illumination amidst the beckoning abyss. Just before I could grasp it, everything around me exploded with a violent shudder. The ground below me ruptured like the surface of an awakening volcano, leaving only yawning chasm-spectral arms clawing at me, trying to pull me down into oblivion. In the maw of this void, I felt a hand grasp my wrist, ice cold, sending a jolt of petrifying recognition through my spine. "Once you embark on this path, there's no turning back," the girl's voice croaked, shifting now into a haunting echo from the depths of 1,000 unshed tears. "Stay with us or we will drown you in your own remorse in a frenzied maelstrom." I then caught sight of my own face staring back at me from the shadows, nothing but a grotesque mask, forged from my fears and made whole by the stories I had refrained from telling. "You belong to us now." Desperation consumed me, a palpable yearning flickering within my chest, and with all my strength, I lunged toward the light one last time. But as I fell into that gateway, a cold whisper slithered through my mind, icy and unyielding. "Welcome home. You've made your choice, and now the story has begun." As I crossed into the unknown, a terrible truth unfurled before me, a chilling revelation of the depths of my own darkness, and waiting beyond the light was something not even the shadows could foresee. The world beyond the glowing portal was disorienting, a kaleidoscope of twisting colors and distorted shapes that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of something ancient and unspeakable. I stumbled forward, my footing uncertain, as if the ground itself was undulating beneath my feet. Each step resonated with the chaos brewing around me, pulling me deeper into a narrative I had not yet begun to comprehend. Whispers darted around me like wraiths, weaving through my thoughts, both intoxicating and maddening. "You are here now," they murmured, the words a symphony of anguish mingled with a sinister glee, like children playing in the ruins of a forgotten realm. "You have unlocked the gate, but the stories demand to be told." Through the shifting haze, shadows began to delineate themselves, figures emerging with the grace of tormented spirits tracing patterns through the air. Each one bore the weight of unending suffering, their forms contorted by the relentless burden of their unvoiced tales. I stood entranced, a voyeur peering into their depths, feeling the clammy tendrils of their despair wrapping around my heart. That a woman with sunken eyes caught my gaze. Her lips barely moved, yet I could hear her mournful wail, "Listen! Listen!" The weight of her sorrow was palpable, a tempest raging inside me. I stumbled closer, drawn to her plight, though instinct urged me to flee back into the light. "What happened to you?" I whispered, the sound quaking in the air, both an invitation and a challenge. With a shudder, the woman began to speak, her voice breaking like shattered glass. "They think they can escape us, but their choices bind them, just like yours." A jagged grin sliced across her face, eerily juxtaposed against the tears shimmering in her eyes. She reached out a gnarled finger that traced the air between us, sketching symbols of curse and consequence before vanishing like smoke. The surroundings shifted, morphing into an old, decrepit apartment, indistinguishable from nightmare or memory. Walls were splattered with faded patterns, remnants of innocence now morphed into the backdrop for unspeakable horrors. Laughter echoed through the rooms, cruel and mocking, making my skin crawl as it reverberated through the air. I was out of my depth, tethered to this realm by something more profound than fear-guilt. Perhaps? The shadows shifted, revealing grotesque scenes from their lives. A man in blood-stained clothing closed off the world in a frenzied frenzy, his own reflection a fractured beast looking hopelessly back at him, the knife in hand all too inviting. I heard the woman's voice again, insistent and urgent. Each story holds a key path to liberation that they refuse to unearth. Find it, she urged. Before it finds you. The atmosphere thickened, and the shadows tightened, every glance richer with resentment as they feverishly whispered among themselves. I could feel their gaze boring into my psyche, plunging deeper into my own insecurities. Was I worthy of delivering these tales? They were powerful echoes of lives cut short, hidden under layers of shame and guilt, steeped in blood and a raspy chorus. They began chanting my name, forcing me to confront my own truth, the choices I had made to arrive at this precipice of existence. One of us. Their voices twisted and spiraled like serpents, tightening their grip around my throat. You are as lost as we are. You are the next chapter. The next tale. Panic coursed through me, fueling a frantic search for respite. My eyes darted from figure to figure, desperate to discern a way out. But all pathways merged into a black abyss filled with indecipherable horror. Then, as if summoned by sheer desperation, the air around me crackled and split like glass. A grinning entity materialized before me. A grotesque mask made from the very nightmares that haunted my subconscious, the manifestation of a serial killer whose aura electrified the air with malice. You wish to know their stories? It hissed, teeth sharp and glistening. Then become one with us. Fear gripped my heart as I staggered backward, the truth of their unspeakable acts swirling around me like a storm. I felt my memories agonizingly rush to the surface, grappling for control. Would I become a voice for the silenced, or was I destined to commit similar horrors? Just as I turned to flee, the ground cracked beneath me, revealing a cavernous abyss where shadows writhed and clawed, hungry for the life I carried. The darkness knows you, the voice of the woman echoed, a taunting resonance slicing through the chaos. It knows every secret you've kept. Embrace it. Become the vessel that I end that moment. I saw visions, flashes of blood, terror, and unspeakable acts merging into the cacophony of fate, dragging me toward an inevitability I couldn't escape. As the shadows closed in, I screamed, a sound swallowed by the abyss, and a cold pair of hands grasped my shoulders, wrenching me back, but it was too late. The weight of their anguish swelled in a tidal wave, crashing over me. Then silence, the kind that suffocated all hope, and then, amidst the void, a single voice broke through. Welcome to the narrative. Your story, your darkness, has just begun. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight, and in that dark expanse, I realized fear itself had taken form, not a phantom, not an illusion, but a palpable presence, hungry and waiting. I couldn't tell if I was still in the apartment with the shadows, or if I had crossed into another dimension of terror, where dread dwelled in the very fabric of existence. My breath came in ragged gasps filled with the rancid scent of decay, an echo of all the souls drawn into the endless void. I was no longer alone in the darkness. I could feel the weight of eyes hungry, insatiable, watching with a fervor that made my skin crawl. An overwhelming sensation washed over me, as though the cursed stories of those tormented souls were coiling around me like serpents, wrapping tighter with each frantic heartbeat. Gradually, the oppressive dimness shifted, becoming translucent, revealing flashes of grotesque truths, the very manifestations of horror I had been unwilling to acknowledge. They flickered before me like strobe lights, blood splatters against walls, chilling laughter that echoed in the corridors of broken lives, and glimmers of twisted joy that emerged through unrelenting pain. Each scene played out like a frozen nightmare, painting a tapestry of grief and madness that tugged at the corners of my sanity. Then, a figure emerged, gliding from the shadows with a grace that belied its grotesque form. It loomed taller than the others. Its distorted features reflected the spawn of Pina's broken visage that seemed otherworldly yet achingly familiar. You have tasted our despair, it rasped, the words falling from its mouth like flakes of soot. Now you shall inherit our secrets. With a swift motion, it flicked a hand, and the darkness peeled back to reveal a blood-soaked Ruman office once filled with dreams now steeped in the chaos of a despairing soul. A man hunched over a desk, scrolls littering the floor, the frozen expression on his face a portrait of agony. His eyes, wide with dread, spoke of a choice long made, his hands stained crimson. He sought revelatory truths where we once roamed. The figure continued, its voice dripping with malice. What comes next? Will you step into this endless cycle of sin? Or will you tread down a different path? You're as lost as we are, just waiting to shed your skin, to become the voice for the nameless. I backed away but was met with a wall of shadow, every escape sealed. My heart thundered in response to the sense of inevitability that gripped Muhat. Did it mean to embrace the darkness? Would I be forced to surrender my soul to bear witness to their tales? In the ominous stillness, the grotesque figure stretched out its hand. Open yourself, let the despair slither within. It waits for you, hungry for connection. The air thickened, charged with a terrifying energy that made the very hairs on my skin stand on end. I had danced too close to the flame. I was bound by invisible threads to their plight, condemned to echo their stories, their pain. But as the figure awaited my response, a sudden rumble vibrated through the air, deep and foreboding. The walls of this malevolent space shifted and warped, blurring the line between the living and the damned. Whispers escalated into a crescendo, clawing at my consciousness, urging me to succumb. One of us, they cried, their sounds overlapping into a twisted symphony of solemnity and revelry. Just as I felt the darkness press toward my core, something struck with blinding Claritian image of my own reflection in that shattered mirror, fragments depicting a life marred by choices I dared not explore. Would plunging deeper into this nightmarish realm indeed grant me the insight to free those lost souls, or would it only chain mine to theirs forever? And then, a scream echoed through the realm, a shrill, echoing wail that shattered the oppressive silence, jerking me from my uncertainty. The walls buckled, splintering reality, and a vortex opened beneath me, a maw of shadow stretching wide, hungry for new tales to devour. As I teetered on the brink of that void, the last image seared into my mind. The man from earlier, his bloodied hands nodding in eerie communion with me, whispering, "Choose your story before it chooses you." With a jolt, the darkness surged forth, crashing against me like a tidal wave. Trepidation morphed into pure terror as a searing light burst forth, revealing the desolate expanse of what lay beyond the monsters I had only begun to confront. The last line of sanity frayed. I plunged headfirst into the abyss, consumed by laughter and gasps of agony, as the figures around me screamed in joyous torment, "Welcome to the narrative!" And then darkness swallowed me whole as one voice resonated in the void, ringing louder than all the others, "Your secret is the last tether holding you back." I stood there, lost in an unfathomable chasm of darkness, an expanse where memory dissolved and reality became warped. The cacophony of howls that had once seemed distant now enveloped me, a tormenting symphony resonating with a grotesque familiarity. They were voices of horror, each syllable thrusting deeper daggers of dread into my being. I felt their thousand unwhispered stories clawing at the fragile fabric of my sanity, each tale a thread waiting to be woven into my own. The darkness wrapped around me like a shroud, cold and stifling, as I struggled to maintain any fragment of my former self. In that suffocating void, the grotesque figures emerged anew, their features twisted by anguish, each one lunging forward with desperate need. I held my breath, knowing I was no longer merely an observer. I had become part of their macabre narrative, lost in the liminal space between telling and being told. "Join us," they roared, a unified chorus of despair that sent ripples of fear skittering down my spine. I felt their presence eating away at my resolve, creeping in to nestle alongside my darkest fears and regrets. I was not just here to listen. I was drawn into their cyclical suffering, and it hurt to realize how close I had come to merging with their narratives, a twist of fate pulling me further into their void. Hadn't I written my own story, a life lived in witness to their horrors, now withering under the weight of this new reality. And then the girl, that once desperate figure who had clung to hope, emerged from the shadows once more, her face a palimpsest of anguish and urgency. "You have to tell it," she screamed, the echoes of her plea reverberating inside my skull. "You have to give them a voice." "Why me?" I gasped. "Why must I be the one?" "Because you opened the door." Her words were frayed, echoing a union of terror and fervor. "You tempted the darkness, and now it claims you as its own. If you don't tell their stories, you will become one of them, lost to the ages. What they suffered shall live on, but only if you amplify their pain." That I faltered, vibration of dread coursing through my veins. "But what if the truth consumes me? What if I can't bear it?" Her eyes gleamed, radiant with a haunting intensity. "What if that very truth reveals your own?" With that, I understood what buried deep in my heart was a secret wound, one I thought long hidden beneath layers of pain. The darkness around me stirred, coiling as if it recognized the pulse of my fear. The shadows fluctuated, writhing in anticipation, desperate to see if I would succumb to the truth I had kept hidden. I felt that truth lapping at my heels, begging for acknowledgement. Shivers coursed through my body, but still, I resisted. What awaited me in the light? A reclamation of fractured memories? A return of shadows that threatened to dismantle my sanity? As I spoke, my voice trembled. "I'll tell their stories, but not my own." Then a hunger erupted from the void, a visceral growl that rumbled through the dark realm, threatening to drown me. The shadows surged forward, faces twisted in anguished glee as they began to merge with my spirit, blood and memory weaving as one. "Tell it or suffer," they cried triumphantly, their hands clawing at the edges of my reality, tethering me to a fate woven from despair. And in that moment, I felt an awakening, deep-seated horror from my own history spilling forth. Horrific memories, whispers of loss I had repressed, rose into the forefront of my mind. The flash of criminal history, the ache of grief intertwined with deep regret, and my own culpability that lay dormant, waiting to rise alongside those ghostly figures. But I would wrest back control. Rattling breath emerged between gasps, words flowing unrelentingly from my lips, heavy with the burden of truths long silenced. They sought innocence and snuffed it out like a candle, carving away the flesh of hope. Voices surged around me, rising with fervor as the shadows caught every syllable, amplifying my words into a roaring echo of anguish felt throughout the abyss. I surrendered to their torment, weaving the threads of their tales with my own, every word painted in the frenetic darkness. The more fervently I spoke, the more my history intertwined with theirs, a symphony of scorn and remorse building to a fever pitch. Yet as I carved through the layers, relaying their horrors to the void, chills cascaded down my spine. The room pulsated. The cries of the tortured echoed louder, growing frenzied in their search for release. With every story I told, something shifted within, mesomething darker entwined with my soul, ready to materialize. Suddenly, the oppressive weight of their torment layered heavy upon me, but it was no longer suffocating. It electrified my consciousness. I began to drown. The tortured souls flooded in, merging limbs and cries, a swirling mass of anguish fighting to be reborn. "Tell us more," they screamed in fervent need, and recognition flickered in the frail light of my fear. That I felt the spectral entity shimmer, and a sickening twist sliced through the room, remnants of otherworldly power clawing around me. Gathered stories hung thick in the air, waiting for someone to unravel their tapestry of suffering. But the deeper I went, the more I understood the darkness, too, was part of me. Their experiences mirrored my own hidden scars, an inheritance of despair I had fought so fiercely to subdue. "No," I gasped, feeling the threads fall away as I struggled against their grasp. "I refuse to be defined by your torment." Shadows writhed, scraping against my very essence, and in that moment, I seized a lurch of power. "You will not consume me," I roared, voice echoing through the desolation as I tore apart the narrative they sought to weave from my pain. I spun the tales of their atrocities anew, twisting the narrative to break the cycle. In a breathless revelation, I revealed their horrors to the world outside every name, every story fueling my resolve to shine a light into the abyss. The dark entities recoiled, the noise growing fractious, desperate to reclaim their impossible hold on me as I reined in my voice, breath growing ragged. I could feel something shift within the sphere. The tidal wave of souls began to break free, scattering as I poured my heart into the world outside. "Mix not your anguish with mine," I shouted, ready to sever the chains they sought to affix. The night erupted in fury, lighting the way as the shadows screeched and seethed, twisting against the remnants of the freedom I etched in the air. With each tale released, the tangled threads of their sorrow detached from my being, trailing into the chasm that yawned beneath me. But as the final whispers dissipated, a dark figure surged forward, eyes glinting with malice, raking through the tendrils I had expelled. "Foolish child," it hissed, visceral power pulsating through its tone. "The darkness is a curse, and you just awoke it." I stood frozen, heart slamming in my chest as the essence of pain surged for the remnants of the very dread I had fought to cast off. Within the depths of the void, shadows twisted and tightened, coiling back like a serpent. The cycles were not broken by mere banishment. They were reshaped as the darkness swirled and roared. Something dark crested over the vibrant light I had created, an entire story forged in anguish, and this time it had my name written in bold letters. And then, with a chilling clarity, I understood the fragility of my newfound power teetered dangerously upon an unseen edge. Once awakened, there are stories that can never be put to rest. Your journey is just beginning, the dark entity whispered, brushing against my mind like a fleeting nightmare. You cannot escape your own tale has woven itself into the fabric of others. At that moment, I understood, though I had once striven to expose the truths of those lost narratives. The actual horror lay in the fact that my own legacy had been birthed from the shadows. "Welcome back," the figure grinned, a grotesque caricature of joy and despair, pulling closer the darkness that swarmed around me. The chilling laughter reverberated in my ears, and with a heart-rending revelation, I realized that the stories might never belong solely to me, but the burden of carrying them forward? That weight, that burden was now indelibly mine, forever darkening the path I thought I could escape. And as the walls closed back in, tethering me once more to the realm of the haunted, I found myself echoing a last wretched laugh, a twisted mirror reflecting the undeniable truth. You can never truly escape the stories that haunt your soul. They will always return, drawn to your very essence. Your secret is the last tether holding you back, denoted a truth that would haunt me for infinity. What had I only begun to discover? What darkness would I summon forth again? And would it one day consume all I held dear? Every echo became a promise, a whisper of fate intertwined with horror, the tale of my soul entangled with countless before me. And even now, I stood on the precipice of a horror unfathomable in its unfolding.